I'll say only nice things to you, so don't about you, don't worry. Um, so,
Yes.
um, so yeah, Belinda, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out to talk to us and our audience. Um, I guess the first thing to jump into is just sort of, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what what makes you tick and what drives you to, be part of, as your book is called, the Adventure Revolution?
My name's Belinda Kirk. Yes. I have been leading groups on adventures for 30 years. And I also had my life saved, I think, by adventuring as a teenager. And all that time, I have seen this powerful transformational effect and impact of adventure. And I just, adventure for me is just a wonderful way of living, both going on adventures and then bringing home the gifts that you learn from adventuring back to every other part of your life. So I do, I mean, I'm a bit one dimensional in the sense that I just love adventuring. Um, but I've done adventuring in different ways. I've run charities, I've run tour companies, I've worked with youth development expeditions, with scientists and scientific expeditions. I've led groups on smaller adventures much closer to home in Britain. I've written a book about adventuring, and I now run a conference series and a research project because after 30 years of seeing adventure change people's lives for the better, I've spent about the last decade just being really curious as to why adventure's so good for us, coming up with theories and sharing other people's research on why adventure is good for us and how we can therefore use it. And yeah, and being a mum as well. That's my main job. And trying to be an adventurous mum, which is extremely hard, actually. I get it when people say, I
That's, yeah,
now get it.
parenting's an adventure in itself, isn't it?
It is. And the way that we live and the way our society's set up, it's really hard to go out and be adventurous with your kids. I mean, um, in the way that you might have before kids. So it's yeah. So that's been a more recent journey I've been on, but I'm very lucky to have a lovely little 7-year-old. Well, nearly seven this month, and we go on lots of adventures and find ways to do that together. So I try to live what I talk as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So you mentioned the book briefly. The book for me is really interesting for lots of different reasons. Why do you think it's important to sort of not just talk about adventure and why it's good for you from, I mean, I don't think about it too scientifically, but I kind of, it seems quite clear to me that adventure and being outdoors and getting away from what society is making us be around most of the time, work and stresses of all of that. Why do you think it's important to look at the neuroscience and the psychology of it all and sort of apply that to what we all naturally feel is to kind of quantify, I suppose, what it is you're saying?
I think because I was trying to make a case for adventure, the book was very much about creating an argument as to why we need to fit it into our very overbusy lives and why we shouldn't think of it as frivolous and a sort of a luxury or something that's just for the elite. You sort of think of bearded men. You got a beard, well done. You've started off bearded men on mountain summits. Kind of conquering, and of course that is a part of adventure. But there is also kids camping in their garden, or learning to do your first Eskimo roll in your kayak for the first time, or learning how to navigate and go up a hill or something. I mean, there's a whole spectrum. So I think what's important is I've been trying to rebrand adventures as something that's for everybody, and also that it's for everybody because we actually need it. We are hunter gatherers. That's how we evolved. That's who we still are. And our society has changed around us, but our bodies and our minds are the same. And so I think that's why adventure is such a good fit for us, physically and mentally. It's so good for us. And I think some people also, like me, I like to, if you're trying to convince me of an argument, I like some evidence. I like nice stories, and the book's full of amazing stories that inspire and grab your attention, and make you think, well, if they can do that, and if that had that impact, maybe I could get some of that magic too. But I like a bit of science, and I know there's other people like me. They like the stories, but they like the evidence. And so it was really important for me to present the evidence, and also that allowed me to really deeply think about the ways in which I've seen adventure impact people and how that might be working on a psychological or neuroscience level. And there are, there's everything from in the book from talking about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems to different psychological models and theories. And there's even a bit of evolutionary psychology in there. There's a whole layering of different disciplines that I sort of dipped into to just try to get just out of curiosity, to try to get a bigger picture of to create this case for adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that scientific knowledge, I suppose it gives it more integrity and sort of background, I suppose. So if you are trying to make change and potentially look at legislation and things like that, which certainly we should probably be doing, that really gives you a better grounding to do that on, doesn't it?
Well, that is later stage. So the book is really talking to everyday people like me and you, but also talking to people who might work in adventure. So it helps them. I know a lot of people who work in adventuring and adventure therapy and outdoor leading and so on. They've used that to better explain the impact of their work. But yes, on the next stage level, and that is something that I'm collaborating with other organisations about, is to try to convince policymakers that we need not just playtime or not just outdoors time or green prescription, but we need adventurous elements to that, and that means that all of these other good things have a even deeper impact. So, yeah, the evidence is important for policy change.
So, okay, so you mentioned that, climbing like that mountain, for example, is an adventure, but that's not all an adventure is. How would you define the word adventure to make people who might brand themselves as not adventurous realize that actually they are adventurous and there's lots and lots of ways that they can be adventurous, um, and not necessarily be to shy away from the word adventure?
Yeah. um,
Yeah.
so it's a really quite a hard. I went back and forth in the book about about how on earth do I define adventure, because like we all know what it is, don't we? But it's kind of hard to put into words. And I looked up the dictionary definition and stuff like that. But I think that adventure, from my point of view, and definitely from the context of well-being and mental and physical health, adventure is a chosen challenge, preferably in nature, but doesn't have to be. But a chosen challenge. So not a challenge that is forced onto you. That is usually a trauma or could become traumatic, but a chosen challenge. And if you think of chosen challenge, that could be everything from summiting that mountain in your picture there but it could also be going out and learning something new, like learning how to ride a bike for the first time, or learning how to go kayaking or climbing or what have you. But it can, I think, to be really, like we sort of touched on earlier, to make it accessible and to break down this idea that adventure is not for everyone. You can do really small and accessible things that are also cheap, because let's face it, we have a recession, especially well in England and globally. There's also obviously things are different in different countries, but it's difficult to find the time, but it's also difficult to find the money. So things like I have been geocaching with my son most recently, and so any kid would love, I don't know, maybe not any kid. I've only got one. I can only really go from my experience with him. But he absolutely loves treasure hunts. And I know lots of other kids do. And I actually love treasure hunts too. Um, and I think no, not childish, childlike, a sense of childlike wonder is something that I hope to keep, and is good for adventuring. And maybe adventuring helps me to keep. But I love going on treasure hunts with my son. And so we have this geocaching app. We don't pay for it. There are upgrades and stuff, but you can get it for free. And then we can go around. We go around our house. We're lucky we live in the country, so there's lots of good geocaching. But there's loads in towns, cities, and everywhere really. I mean, you don't. They're not absolutely everywhere. They're in little clumps usually. But that is something you can go and do. That we're actually, I've talked about it before, and we did it. I did it ages ago, once or twice, but now we're really getting into it with our son because it's really fun. But you can do wild swimming. I jump in a river twice a week. Again, I'm lucky. I live in the country, and there is a clean enough river. Clean rivers are not something we're good at in Britain at the moment. But there are apps and stuff.
I would not swim in the local river. To me, it's yeah. I've got a friend who works in well, alongside Welsh Water in the sort of sewage management part, and he absolutely recommends to never ever swim in the River Taff in Cardiff. So if anyone's from Cardiff, don't do it.
Isn't it a shame? You see, I also think that the more we do this stuff, with the more we stand up for clean rivers, the more we stand up for 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 what is essentially business overtaking our physical and mental health and our societal health.
Yeah, I mean
Anyway,
that's a huge subject in itself, isn't it? So let's put that to the
it is.
side. Um,
We will put it aside, but I do think that you got to mention it because by going out and doing stuff like this, you not only become empowered to stand up and say, "Hang on," but you also become connected. You care about the environment, and that is really important right now, as we become more urbanized than ever. So adventure, yeah, I can't remember. We've got off the point. Well, I've got off the point. I'm a terrible rambler. Sorry. But yeah,
yeah, no, that's
adventure's
good. That's good.
fun, and you can do small stuff. You can camp in your garden, camp in a campsite, wild camp on Dartmoor, um, or in Scotland, or ask permission and wild camp somewhere else. There's some great opportunities, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And I think if you start small, then you build up. That's the best way of doing it. Well, probably.
You see, like for me, 'cause I live so close to the Brecon Beacons, and for me, I love going to the Brecon Beacons. It's beautiful, but actually, so if you look at Pen y Fan, it's a really, really famous hill to climb, and for me, it's just like, oh, I've been up Pen y Fan, that's fine. But actually, for some people, that is a huge, massive achievement. And I think it's really easy for people these days who are more adventurous, like myself or yourself, to kind of downplay the achievements of others and be like, oh, it's not really that adventurous. Like the first time I went to base camp for work to do some filming, and first time I did, I was like, I can't believe I did it. This isn't like this. It was entirely unlike me, didn't know what I was getting into. Um, and and I came back and I was like talking to my friends who have for years been into rock climbing, mountain climbing, and I was like going on about it, and they're like, "Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it?" Like really kind of, and it really knocked me down, and it made me kind of lose that sense of achievement in a way. So now since then, I've been up Kilimanjaro and I've been up Mount Toubkal, and it's really amazing. But every time I do it, and actually I think it's an affliction of myself anyway. I really downplay the achievement. I'm like, yeah, it's not that big a deal, but actually, it is. Even though thousands of people do it, given me and my background and my past, I suppose, it is a big achievement. And I think it's really difficult for people to maybe acknowledge that sometimes because of the way society frames adventure. So, Pen y Fan is an achievement depending on what your background is.
I think if you do anything that's beyond what you thought you could, then you're winning. And yes, we live in a compare contrast society. You stick it up on Facebook and then someone goes, "Oh yeah, I did that last year." Um, I think you're unfortunate that some of your mates were quite so um, accomplished. But a lot of life is also about living it at the time and the enjoyment. And I'm really glad that you remember the enjoyment you got by doing it and just afterwards, before someone maybe put your fire out a little bit, because you know, of course it is. It's a huge. I mean, I don't. It's also just not about impressing anyone, is it? Because I fell into I did expeditions for a long time, and I went after a Guinness World Record, and I've got a Guinness World Record, and that was like, oh well, that's what you need to do next. It's kind of becomes tick box mentality. And you know what? My Guinness World Record expedition was probably the least fun expedition I've ever done, and it kind of means the least to me. When I've taken people and I've had an impact on their futures, and my little way of, the little catalyst of being able to take young people on expeditions, or anyone, people with disabilities or people from different backgrounds, people who maybe wouldn't have accessed the outdoors, on big and small adventures. Those are much more meaningful in the long term. So I'm probably gone off rambling again, but I, I think the more adventuring you do and the more time you spend in nature, there's lots of studies for both of these, you become less interested in extrinsic, i.e., other people's extrinsic validation, and you become much more attuned to why you're doing stuff. Like, what's your motivation? What do you feel about stuff? Because that's the only real route to feeling happiness, or what's the word? Content in your life is to try and none of us can stop from worrying about what other people think, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's really not
And
about
yeah,
other
so,
people's.
adventuring for yourself rather than how other people might perceive it. I was listening to a book, an audio book called "I'm Worth More," a bit of personal development for you. And this guy was just like, look, no matter what you do, people are going to judge you. So just do what you want to do. Don't, don't try really hard, and it's difficult, but try really hard not to worry about what other people say. Um, so yeah.
It's a constant battle.
Right. So
I have to constantly remind myself.
absolutely, yeah, totally. Um, so I was in Sussex visiting my parents recently, and there's a park there. I took my girls there, 3.5 and like one, just over 15 months, and we went to the park and we were playing on the swings and all that sort of stuff. And then there's this overgrown plant. I'm going to get to a point here.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's these little overgrown plants where you can go, and it's like a little kind of mazy den kind of thing, and it's quite exciting. And at the back of that, by a wall, is this tiny little tree, which is uber climbable. Like it's just say it might as well have a sign above it saying "Please climb me." And so I was like, I said to Phoebe, my older one, do you want to climb this tree? And she's like, oh yeah. I was like, oh, I'll make sure you're safe. And well, okay. She was like, yeah, okay, cool, let's do it. And as she started to climb it, this little boy who was also in this little den bit came up to me and he goes, you shouldn't do that. It might be dangerous. I was like, oh no. So this, everyone parents their children differently, but obviously this child is super, super protected from anything like that. And I said, well, it might be dangerous, but it also might be really fun. So let's find out. And we just went ahead and did it anyway. But it made me really sad that there are clearly lots and lots and lots of children out there who are so protected from being able to make mistakes and potentially injure themselves a little bit. Um, and so do you think that society's got to a point where we're so far removed from that kind of inherent need for nature, and it because of the way society is set up, and people just feel like they're not adventurous and they can't let themselves out to do that? It made me really sad.
I know stuff like that makes me a bit sad as well. Although also we can't judge too much because he may just not. He may just find heights the thing. He might be really good in the water or something. I've learned to know that we don't ever know how other people really parent. We see little snippets, but I think as a society, the data is there. I mean, as well as what we witness and we understand. I can from personal experience, I know what my childhood was like versus what is normal for children now. And I was okay. And again, everyone parents differently. And actually, my childhood was definitely not idyllic and perfect because there was an element of neglect and violence as well in my past, in my childhood. But what I did have was a certain freedom, a freedom that most kids are not given now. So I've muddied the conversation by throwing that in there. But anyway, if you there's the data set, for example, 90 the area in which children roam now has shrunk by 95% since the 70s, which is when I was about born. So in that generation, the area in which children play and roam and are free has shrunk by that much. And that's because we basically don't let kids out of our sight now. So we used to let them out of our sight now a lot more and a lot younger. The age at which children can go to school on their own has gone from something like 8 to 11 and things like that. So there's massive I mean, there's not just what we've witnessed, but there are definitely huge changes. And obviously, we also have seen this massive rise in mental health problems. I'm not saying it's just because of that. There's also things like social media and screens, and lots of people living more on their own, and less of family netting up and supporting parents and so on. So there's lots of other things going on. But yeah, we don't let our kids fall and fail in order to build coping mechanisms by getting back up and dusting themselves and getting on with it. We're not letting kids find their autonomy by allowing them outside of our sight. We're not giving them that and I'm talking in a bit broad generalization here. And I think also, if you do try and be out of the norm and you did let your kid at 8 years old walk to school, you might have social services coming round. And there are examples of that, of people allowing their kids, when they feel their kids are ready to go on the tube and or go on or walk or do these sorts of things. So I think there's also a fear um, of being seen to not look after your child properly. So you've got all of these things going on, and you've got some very cotton-wooled kids in general. And I think adventure is a really good way, if it's set up in the right way, that you can actually give kids the feeling of risk, even if there's a perceived risk and not an actual risk. So even that, I'm not saying put your kids at risk on purpose, although of course the element of you let your kids climb a tree, you choose when that is best, and it is very hard to quantify. But at least, even if we can't go that far, we can give the children the idea of perceived risk, and that in itself will build confidence, autonomy, coping mechanisms, and all these things that may be. Yeah, so I mean, it's a really complex thing. But all the data shows, as well as, frankly, common sense, shows that if you bring a little bit of risk or a little bit of um, choice into, say, a playground, there's amazing studies about where they've taken out all the bucket seats and the over risk, well, not over risk, because risk assessment is important. It's just you want your child to risk assess for themselves, and they have to learn to do that. They can't just learn it when they're 18 overnight. So they've taken out the kind of over safe kit out of a playground and stuck in a whole load of junkyard playground stuff like planks and tires and even tools. And what they found in those sorts of situations is that not only do kids grow up grow to learn their own risk assessment for themselves and autonomy and so on, but also things like bullying went down by like 500% in one study in New Zealand, I remember. So also their social skills and their whole experience completely changes. Anyway, so yeah, we need to do that.
Oh,
But
brilliant.
that's
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Perceived risk is an interesting one. Can you talk a bit more about what you mean by perceived risk and sort of how, I guess, how you can manage that in your eyes?
Well, it's just, if we're talking, because we obviously don't want to put kids at risk intentionally, but there is a a imbalance between, in our society we put physical safety over mental safety, as it were. And so there is a balance. We can't just expect children to be cotton wooled and then pop out at 18 and then suddenly learn all the stuff they need. Like and as parents or educators or whoever we are in our whatever role we are, we got to keep them alive, number one, but we do also have to prepare them for life. And so there is this balance that we have to find. Perceived risk, all I mean is that obviously children will come across real risk, crossing the road, climbing trees, whatever. But if we can arrange adventures which, like bouldering or something, where it seems very scary and risky to be climbing up a wall, but if you've got crash mats in the right place, in the right way, you're teaching them the right techniques to fall and so on, the actual risk versus is the perceived risk to them might feel very scary and very big, but the actual risk is much lower. And that's obviously a nice, it's a nice way of introducing other people, not just children, but anyone that you're taking into an environment. You don't want to just
Yeah.
put them at the highest risk possible. but you want the benefits of challenging your fear, challenging what you can do.
Yeah, and I guess it's just about, and this doesn't just go for kids, does it? It goes for adults who are planning on doing an adventure, like something that we offer a challenge. It's about managing it correctly, managing expectations, managing risks, making sure that everyone is aware that these are the risks. This is how we mitigate them, and this is how we make sure you're as safe as you possibly can. And then taking away that kind of, well, not taking away, but trying to alleviate that potential anxiety people might have or worry people might have around doing a particular thing, and saying, give it a go, and the safety is there, and we've thought about it as people who run adventures for people.
Yeah, risk assessment is all about getting it to a reasonable level, isn't it? A reasonable level of the balance of the likelihood of a risk happening and the severity. So, and balancing those things. So that's essentially what risk assessment is on paper for our legal documents, but it's also what we do day to day, every day. You get out of bed, you're risk assessing, um, you know, carrying a hot coffee along. you think, so everything's that, but oh, I can't remember. But yeah, risk assessment is essentially it's about stopping activities when it really is unreasonable and the safety is compromised to the point that's unreasonable. But it's about finding ways to make things happen and keep the level of risk reasonable. And that's what we do on paper, but that's what we all have to learn to do in life. And they've shown with lots of stuff that the kids who learn stuff earlier they are more instinctive and they're much safer. So there's also amazing studies about kids that are have riskier play actually have less accidents because they learn to take responsibility. They learn to risk assess themselves. So there's this oh, I can't remember her name. There's an amazing researcher, particularly this woman, this professor in or this researcher in New Zealand, and she's got this amazing data around the fact that actually the more risky play you give kids, the safer they actually are. And that is like wow. And I can see that in my son. Our son has he's when did we gave him his first knife when he was 5. Now some people might say that is crazy, but actually, what I heard about was our friend, a really good friend of ours, Andre from Bulgaria. He said in his country, it's tradition that at 5 years old, kids get their first knife. And it's like, excellent. Okay, I'm gonna, I'm gonna, it's scary. I'm a bit scared, I'm a bit worried because obviously I don't want him to cut himself. But yeah, that makes sense. We have to use our judgment and find a balance, don't we? So we got him a knife when he was 5. We've taught him how to use it. We talked about how to cut away. He loves whittling now. He loves it, and he's so good at it. He's got several knives now, and he's got like a little boring thing and a folding saw, and I do believe, and we live in the country, so we chop wood all the time. There's axes around. Now, if we just told him never to touch anything and that everything was always locked away, I think that if he ever got hands on that stuff, he would be obviously very dangerous. It would be very dangerous to him. But because we have tried to teach him about how to use it, and we have a very clear rule that is like there are toys and there are tools. These are totally different things, and you are now old enough to know the difference, and we trust you, and we're going to train you, and and you just find a way. But you can't teach them overnight when they suddenly turn 16. You have to start. And yeah, and I think the younger you start, like riding a horse, using a knife, climbing trees, you get more and more of a inbuilt instinct. Going in the sea. Um, so yeah, you have to be brave, and yet
It's really
it's terrible.
sad that you have to qualify. We gave our child a knife at the age of 5, and then like the natural assumption is like, oh, that's irresponsible. But no, we gave our child a knife at the age of 5. We didn't just give them the knife and go, right, there's a knife, bye. We we taught him how to use it properly and supervised him, and didn't just, yeah, but the assumption for most people would be like, oh, you shouldn't give a child a knife. But actually, that makes complete and utter sense, and I can see the logic in it, entirely. And I'm going to steal that idea.
Yeah. Well, they love whittling.
Uh,
Give a kid
yeah,
cut a little wood off, give him a knife and they just whittle for hours. He has many pointy sticks, but he has made some other stuff since then as well.
I guess what I'm trying to get across here is that, in the context of what we do at Your Adventure Challenge, that people shouldn't be put off by the fact that it's doing something like paddling for 3 days. It's about preparation, and it's about understanding what's expected of you before you go into it. And that if you book onto something like an adventure challenge, you're not expected to just go a couple of weeks later and go, right, I'm gonna walk these 3 mountains and it's gonna be great. There's time to actually prepare yourself physically and mentally, and understand that it's not just that final thing that you do, but it's actually the adventure is taking the step to book onto it, the the time you take to prepare for it, and the time that you take to, you know, build yourself up to the point. I'm probably not actually fit enough to do the National Three Peaks at the moment, but I know that if I said I was going to do it in X amount of months' time, I've got that nice, fun adventure to build up to get there and enjoy it. So it's not just about getting to the top; it's about the adventure and the story you create as you do it, as you prepare for it. I don't know what your
Yeah, I
thoughts are on that.
agree. I've always thought that because my background for a long time, and when I started talking about adventure for change, changing people's lives, I always used to think it was big adventure. So I always used to think, my gosh, getting to the start of a big expedition is like is you've already done so much. But what I've realised is that I've jumped ahead, and once you start taking kids or other people who, or obviously having a little son, I've been able to relive a lot of this fresh, and it's amazing with these fresh new eyes. But also, if you realise how few people get a chance to do this stuff, um, that when getting to the start is literally just just deciding to do something and then telling people that you're going to do it is a big step. And also I think it works well to do that. It's worked for me because once you've told people that you're going to do something, the social embarrassment, the fear of then not doing it, helps to push you forwards when in your days when you think, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I'm not prepared or whatever. But I love this idea that you're more inspired by the people close to you than you are by people on telly or people on the news who are like setting records and stuff. Because actually, if you think about your friends, family, colleagues, if they go off and do something, they're that's so inspiring because they're coming from the same place as you. And it's very, very empowering indeed. So I think beforehand there's this enormous step of empowerment because once you've committed, then you have to keep going. You're like, oh, and every day you're like making these little changes, and then obviously doing the actual thing, adventure of whatever type, and then afterwards as well, allowing that change into the rest of your life because you might feel very empowered or surprised at what you're capable of. There's this great story. This woman I work with who had lost her leg in a police motorcycle cyclist hit her on the pavement, and sadly she lost her leg above the knee. Brilliant, Lorraine. So Lorraine hadn't walked to the end of her garden in 6 years since losing her leg. And then she heard about this expedition that I was putting together with brilliant team, and it was a team of it was an expedition that we were going to support, but it was for people with disabilities who were going to walk across Nicaragua. And just hearing about this possibility, it was like this was decades ago. This was before the Paralympics was on telly. This was before we had a better understanding in our society about what people can do, whether they be people with or without disabilities. And so for her, as someone quite newly disabled, she heard about this expedition and she walked to the end of her garden after she heard about she had found out about it, she heard about it, and she hadn't walked to the end of her garden in 6 years since losing the end of her leg. and then she walked to the end of her garden for the first time. And just that is like, that's what I mean by these little steps. It's just about reframing what you're capable of, about what life is capable of, about the world, about the people of what the people around us are capable of. Because, you know, it's a pretty dark world in a lot of ways at the moment. And there's so many problems. And yet we can change that, but we can change things, but we've got to believe that it's possible, and that we've got to then be empowered enough to take action. Um,
That
so
feeling
yeah,
of doing something you can't, of doing something that you previously believed you couldn't do, and achieving that thing. So for me, it was, getting up to base camp for, above 5,000 meters and doing that walk. Um, that feeling when you do it, you're like, I was, I it's hard to describe that feeling, but it's a really powerful feeling that you're right. It comes into other parts of your life then, and when you would second guess yourself, you actually go, well, actually no, because I told myself I couldn't do that, and I did it. And so, if it comes to things like work or something like that, and you go, oh no, I don't think I should go for that promotion, I probably won't get it. You think back to that time when you believed you couldn't do something and you achieved it. You go, well, I did it then, so why can't I do it now? So that's, I think that's a really important point about how powerful committing to these adventures can be.
I totally agree. It's like a great unlocking. It's like, wow, I'm not who I thought I was. I can do, if I can do this, then maybe I could do that. And like you say, you, but you do need to keep it alive. And I think that's why people keep going. They get hooked on adventure because it's like so motivational, and you just want more. You just want to feel alive and feel all the good stuff that you feel at the time, but also you want to feel empowered for your afterwards. But yeah, but you got to keep that little fire alive. um,
That's it, absolutely. So, all right, this has been super, super interesting to chat to you. And just to bring it to a close, have you got any final points that you might like to impart to our audience and anyone who's listening slash watching about how they can make the first few little steps to a more adventurous life, to then hopefully decide to do something like a challenge that we offer? Little plug.
I think the important thing is to start small. I mean, this isn't true for maybe everybody, but for most people, I think if being intimidated and finding reasons and excuses not to do something is going to put you off, then start small, because there'll be less intimidating, and it'll be less intimidating, and there'll be less excuses that can get in your way. And also start now. So, go and, I mean, it's easy to go and buy kit. Try not to go and buy kit. Do something else. Commit to doing something else. Um, uh, there's a lot of outdoor kit out there, and sometimes I don't know, you can borrow it off friends and stuff. But maybe if you, I don't know, I think listen to your heart. Is there something you've always fancied doing? Maybe you've always fancied doing a long distance cycle, done just any bit more of a cycling than you've done, or you fancy swimming in the sea, but it's all a bit much. Find other people that are like minded. That's a real key point as well. There are Facebook groups, meetup groups. There's all sorts of groups that you can find other people who your friends might think jumping in a river or jumping in the sea is like ridiculous and all through the year. But there will be other people who don't think it's ridiculous and will go with you. So yeah, and you also get skills training that way and knowledge, but more importantly, get that motivation. So start small, start now, and find people that agree with what you're doing, that kind of support what you're doing. Because naysayers can stop you for years. Whereas if you find one or two people who are up for what you're doing, then then go and do that and have lots of fun. And sometimes it'll be type 2 fun, that's okay, but have lots of fun and keep going back for more.
Love a bit of love a bit of type two fun. That's what Kilimanjaro was for me massively. Well, most of Kilimanjaro was fine. Summit night and back down to the bottom, that was type two fun of the highest regard. So great. So that's really, yeah, really useful stuff, and hopefully people can take something away from that. And just one final thing from you: what can people do to help your cause and your adventure revolution? What, I guess there's Adventure Mind. People definitely need to go out and read the book. But what other things can people do to sort of, make this, I suppose, now dream of yours become more and more prevalent in society?
What's been really helpful is people taking action and just going out on adventures. And then if you take someone with you that maybe you think could do with it or wouldn't do it without a little bit of help, that is brilliant. What's also been really helpful is people quote my book a lot. I hear those ideas, those thoughts more and more. So this idea of changing the the narrative around adventure from being something that's for the elite and is expensive and is frivolous to saying no, it's just like we can all do it and it's really fun and it's good for us and it's worth making the time because it's good for us in all the different ways that I talk about it in the book is really helpful. But you can also, if you're a professional in this area, you can come to the Adventure Mind conference. There are evidence summaries on the adventuremind.org website that share. We're doing more and more of them that are going to share details of why it's good for different groups or doing different adventures is good for us. So that can be really helpful if you're trying to persuade others to get involved, whether it be your school or with your friends or your family or whatever. Yeah, there's lots of different ways. Probably the main thing is though to go out, have some adventures. There's a call to adventure. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast otherwise. Follow that call, and where you can, take people with you. Take people with you and change the way that everyone talks about adventure.
Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I found it really interesting. Hopefully, everyone who's listened has found it really interesting. It's really kind of you to take the time out of your schedule to chat to us about, what you're all about. So, thank you very much. And we'll put all the links to everything we've spoken about, which are relevant, in the notes of the show.
No worries. It's been great. Thanks, Steve.